Captain Elias Ward had seen many things in his life: wars, destruction, loss, and victory. But nothing prepared him for this. When the message came from the Terran Alliance Council, he thought it was a mistake. They wanted him, a decorated soldier and hero of the last interstellar war, to take part in a marriage alliance. Not with a human, but with a Zarin, one of the alien species they had just finished fighting. The war had been long and bloody. Billions had died on both sides. Humanity and the Zarin Dominion finally agreed to peace, but neither trusted the other. To show unity, both governments decided that leaders and heroes from both races would marry across species. It was meant to be a symbol of peace, an emotional gesture to calm the public. But when Elias learned the details of his match, his hands clenched in anger. He was not being paired with a Zarin princess nor a noblewoman, but a servant, a poor worker girl from the Dominion's palace kitchens. Her name was Lyra, and according to the files, she had no family, no wealth, and no standing. She was being offered as a gift, a living symbol of humility. Elias knew what it really meant. It was an insult. The Zarin nobles wanted to humiliate the humans by giving one of their lowest servants to a decorated war hero. It was their silent way of saying, "You may have won the war, but we still own the story." Still, Elias had no choice. The council made it clear. If he refused, he would be dishonored, stripped of command, and the peace deal could collapse. So he agreed, his voice steady but his heart heavy. When the day came, the ceremony was small and cold. No one smiled. The human officers stood at one side of the hall, the Zarin delegation on the other. The air was thick with distrust. Then the doors opened and Lyra entered. She was small compared to the tall human officers, her fur soft and silvery, her golden eyes lowered. Her movements were gentle, graceful in a quiet way. She wore a simple white dress, nothing like the gowns of Zarin nobles. Her ears trembled slightly, a sign of fear in her kind. Elias watched her approach. She looked more like a frightened bird than a bride. He had expected arrogance or cold pride, but all he saw was fear. When she finally stood before him, she didn't look into his eyes. She bowed deeply, her voice shaking. "I will serve you well, husband," she said in broken English, her accent soft but clear. Elias didn't know how to respond. Everyone around them was watching, judging. The cameras recorded every move, every word, so he simply nodded and said the formal line he was told to say. "I accept the union." The officiator declared them bonded under the peace accord. A few claps echoed awkwardly. The moment that was supposed to symbolize the joining of two civilizations felt more like a punishment. After the ceremony, they were taken to their new quarters, a shared home inside the Alliance Embassy on Zarin Prime. It was a beautiful house, filled with light, but the silence between them made it feel empty. Lyra stood near the doorway, clutching her small bag. She didn't move until Elias told her quietly, "You can come inside." She hesitated. "It belongs to you, not me," Elias sighed. "It belongs to both of us now." But she didn't seem to believe him. She placed her things in a corner and stayed there, eyes lowered, waiting for orders. He tried to talk to her, but she only answered in short words, her voice always polite, always afraid. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed. Instead, Elias woke up to find her curled on the floor near the door, wrapped in a thin blanket. When he asked why, she whispered, "Servants do not sleep beside masters." Her words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. He realized she truly believed she was less than him, that she existed only to serve, not to live. Elias sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the dim ceiling. He had fought in 1,000 battles, but now for the first time he felt helpless. He didn't want this marriage. She probably didn't either. But as he looked at the small figure shivering on the floor, something stirred in him, something deep and human, pity, respect, maybe even a quiet sense of duty that went beyond orders. He didn't know how, or when, but he made himself a silent promise that night. He would never hurt her. He would never treat her like a servant. And maybe, somehow, he would find a way to make her feel like she belonged. The days after the marriage passed slowly, filled with awkward silence and quiet confusion. Captain Elias Ward tried to live normally, but nothing about this new life felt normal. He was used to battlefields, orders, and missions, not sharing a home with someone who barely spoke to him. Lyra, the alien girl who was now his wife, moved like a shadow in the house. She woke up early every morning, cooked simple meals, and cleaned the rooms before he could even say good morning. She spoke little, only nodding or bowing whenever he tried to thank her. Elias watched her with mixed feelings. She was careful with every move, as if afraid one mistake would make him angry. When she cleaned the table, her tail stayed low and her ears flat, a Zarin sign of fear. He hated seeing that. One morning, as he sat at the table with his coffee, he asked softly, "Lyra, you don't have to do all this." She froze, looking at him in alarm. "It is my duty," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, you are not my servant. You're my wife." She lowered her gaze again, her voice barely a breath. "I was born to serve, Captain. It is all I know." He didn't answer. His chest felt heavy. She spoke the truth, not because she liked it, but because her world had taught her nothing else. For weeks they lived like that, two strangers under one roof, connected by law, but separated by fear. Elias tried small things to make her comfortable. He bought her warm clothes. He told her to sit at the table with him during meals. She refused at first, trembling. "It is not right," she said. But one night, when he smiled gently and pulled out a chair, she finally sat, at the very edge, her eyes down. They ate in silence, yet it was different from before. It felt like the first small step toward something human. Later that evening, Elias found her outside in the garden looking up at the stars. The moons of Zarin Prime hung bright in the sky, casting silver light over her fur. She looked peaceful, but her eyes were wet. He stood beside her quietly. "You miss your home," he said softly. She nodded. "My village was burned during the war." Her voice broke. "I worked in the palace after. I had no choice." He felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say "I'm sorry," but the words felt too small. He was a soldier of the army that had caused her pain. The guilt weighed heavy in his heart. After a long silence, Lyra spoke again. "Why did your people fight us?" Elias looked up at the stars, searching for an answer that didn't hurt. "Because we were afraid. We thought the Zarin would destroy us. Maybe you thought the same." She looked at him, eyes soft and sad. "And now we are married because of fear too." Her words struck deep. Elias turned to her slowly. "Maybe," he said, "but fear doesn't have to decide everything." That night he did something that shocked her. When it was time to sleep, she quietly spread her blanket on the floor again. Elias stopped her. "Not tonight," he said gently. He pointed to the bed. "You take it. I'll sleep on the floor." Lyra's ears twitched in confusion. "But you are the master." He smiled faintly. "No, I'm just a man who owes you kindness." She stood frozen, not knowing what to do. But when she saw the honesty in his eyes, she finally nodded and lay down. Her body was tense, but as she watched him lie on the floor with a small blanket, something inside her softened. It was the first time anyone had ever chosen to be lower than her. In the quiet of the night, she turned slightly and whispered, "Thank you." Elias didn't move, but he heard it. And for the first time since their strange marriage began, he felt something gentle bloom inside him, a fragile bond, like a seed of trust. He didn't know where it would lead. He didn't know if love could ever grow between them. But he knew one thing for certain: she was not his burden. She was his chance to be better than the war that made them enemies, and maybe, just maybe, she was his first step toward peace, not between two nations, but between two hearts that had both forgotten how to heal. Weeks slowly turned into months, and the distance between Elias Ward and Lyra began to shrink, just a little at a time. The house that once felt like a silent cage was now filled with small sounds. Her quiet footsteps, the soft humming she made while cleaning, and the gentle rustle of her tail brushing against the floor. Elias started noticing things about her. The way her golden eyes reflected light like warm honey, the way her fur changed color slightly in the sun, the way her voice trembled whenever she tried to say something kind, as if she was afraid kindness was not allowed. He realized that she had spent her whole life serving others, never being seen, never being valued. And though he didn't say it out loud, Elias wanted to change that. One morning he invited her to go outside with him to the city market. Lyra looked surprised. "Outside?" she repeated softly. "Yes," Elias said, smiling. "You've been stuck in this house too long. Let's walk a little." She hesitated, looking down at her simple dress. "I am not fit to walk beside you. People will stare." "They can stare all they want," he replied. "I don't care." For a long moment she said nothing. But when he offered his hand, she slowly placed her small, clawed fingers into his. Her touch was cold and trembling. When they stepped into the busy market, people did stare. Some humans looked disgusted. Some whispered behind their backs. Even a few Zarans glared at Lyra for walking beside a human so openly. But Elias walked proudly, his hand never letting go of hers. A human soldier standing by a fruit stall muttered, "A captain married to an alien servant? What a joke." Elias stopped walking. He turned to the soldier, his eyes sharp. "Say that again," he said calmly, "and you'll be cleaning shuttle engines for a year." The soldier went pale and looked away. Lyra was silent for a long time after that. But when they returned home, she stopped near the garden gate. Her tail swayed slightly, her ears twitching nervously. Then she looked up at him and gave a small, uncertain smile. It was faint, shy, but it was the first smile he had ever seen from her. Elias froze for a second, then smiled back. "You smiled," he said softly. Her ears lowered in embarrassment. "You protected me," she whispered. No one ever did that before. From that day onward, something gentle started growing between them. They began talking more, small conversations about food, the stars, and old memories. Lyra told him about her home before the war, a quiet village surrounded by red trees. She had loved to climb them as a child. She laughed softly as she remembered falling once and scaring her mother. That laugh, it was light, almost musical. Elias realized how rare it was to hear her voice filled with joy instead of fear. He found himself listening just to hear it again. At night, they sometimes sat together in the garden. Elias would point at the constellations and tell her human stories about them. Heroes, dragons, lost travelers. Lyra listened with bright eyes, and sometimes she shared Zaran stories of her own. Their worlds were different, yet their hearts were learning to speak the same language. One evening, as the twin moons rose, Elias handed her a small box. Inside was a simple pendant. Nothing fancy, just a small silver star on a chain. She stared at it, her ears twitching in surprise. "For me?" "Yes," he said. "A star for someone who deserves to shine." Her hands trembled as she held it. "I cannot take this. It's too much. It's not enough," Elias said gently. "You've spent your whole life giving. Let someone give to you for once." Tears glimmered in her golden eyes. She clasped the pendant to her chest and whispered, "Thank you, my husband." Hearing those words, spoken not from duty but from warmth, made Elias's heart tighten. For the first time, the word husband didn't sound like an order. It sounded like belonging. That night, as Lyra fell asleep under the silver light, Elias sat by the window, watching her peaceful face. He realized how much had changed. When he first met her, she was nothing more than a political symbol to him, a burden forced upon him by war. Now, she was something precious. He didn't know what the future would bring, or if peace between their worlds would last, but he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to protect her smile, even if the whole galaxy turned against him. Because that small, fragile smile from a poor alien servant had somehow become the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. For a time, life between Elias Ward and Lyra became peaceful. Their home felt warmer, filled with small laughter and quiet comfort. Lyra had learned to smile more often, and Elias had learned that her silence wasn't emptiness, it was peace. But peace, no matter how beautiful, is always fragile. Whispers began spreading among both humans and Zarans. Some called Elias a traitor for marrying an alien. Others called Lyra a disgrace to her kind. To them, love between two enemies was unnatural, a threat to pride, to tradition, to control. It started with stares in the market. Then came the hateful letters slipped under their door. And soon the warnings. "Humans don't belong with beasts," one message read. Another said, "Zarans who lie with humans will burn." Elias tried to ignore them, but Lyra began to tremble every time someone knocked at the door. Her hands shook while cooking, and her tail stayed low in fear. One night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Elias found her sitting near the window, hugging her knees. The pendant he had given her shimmered faintly in her hand. "They hate us," she whispered. "Both sides." He knelt beside her. "Let them hate. They can't change what we are." Tears filled her golden eyes. "But what are we, Elias? A soldier and a servant? From two broken worlds. How can that ever be enough?" He reached for her hand and said softly, "Because we choose to care. That's more powerful than hate." But even as he spoke, the storm outside grew louder. Wind howling, rain slamming against the walls. It was as if the sky itself could feel the tension in their hearts. And then came the explosion. A deafening blast shook the house, throwing Elias to the floor. Smoke and fire filled the hallway. The walls cracked, alarms screamed. Through the chaos he heard shouting, voices outside angry and full of hate. "Down with the traitors," someone yelled. "Burn the abominations!" Elias grabbed his weapon, pulling Lyra behind him. "Stay low!" he shouted over the roaring flames. But Lyra refused to hide. Her fear was gone now, replaced by something fierce and protective. When a grenade rolled into the room, Elias tried to shield her, but Lyra moved first. She kicked it back toward the doorway, and a second later the blast shook the walls again. The shockwave threw her across the floor. "Lyra!" Elias ran to her, his heart pounding. Her arm was bleeding badly, her fur scorched. She tried to speak, her lips trembling. "You are safe?" she asked weakly. He pressed his hand against her wound. "Don't talk. Stay with me." The attackers broke through the door, masked and armed. Elias stood between them and Lyra, firing back with the skill of a trained soldier. Each shot was fueled not by duty but by desperate love. When the last of them fled into the rain, the house was in ruins. Smoke filled the air and firelight flickered on broken walls. Elias dropped his weapon and rushed to Lyra's side again. Her breathing was shallow, her fur stained with blood. She smiled faintly through the pain. "You protected me again," she whispered. Elias shook his head, tears burning in his eyes. "No, Lyra, you protected me." Her eyes began to close, her voice fading like the rain outside. "I didn't want to lose the only one who ever saw me." Those words shattered something deep inside him. He carried her out into the storm, shouting for help as lightning tore through the sky. The medics arrived minutes later, but to Elias it felt like hours. He refused to leave her side even as they treated her. He held her hand tightly, whispering her name again and again. When they finally said she would live, Elias felt his whole body shake with relief. He sat beside her hospital bed, her hand still in his. He didn't care about the ruined house or the hatred outside. The only thing that mattered was the quiet rise and fall of her chest, the proof that she was still here. For 2 days, he didn't sleep. He just stayed there, watching over her. When she finally opened her eyes, weak but alive, Elias leaned forward, his voice trembling. "You're safe now," he whispered. Lyra smiled faintly. "Then so are you." He pressed his forehead to hers, closing his eyes. For the first time in his life, Elias understood what love truly meant. Not a word, not a promise, but a choice. A choice to stand together when the world wanted them apart, and no storm, no hate, no war could ever take that away. The attack had left scars, not just on their home but on the world around them. The Alliance Council and the Zarin leaders were furious. A human captain marrying a low-class alien, surviving an attack together. It was chaos in the delicate balance of peace. Rumors spread like wildfire, and both sides demanded action. Elias felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. He was called to a council meeting on Zarin Prime, a cold hall filled with politicians and soldiers staring at him with judgment in their eyes. Their words were sharp, their tone unforgiving. Captain Ward, the head of the council, began, "Your marriage is a failure. For political stability, it must be annulled immediately." Elias felt his fists clench, his heart pounding. "A failure?" he asked, voice low but steady. "You call this failure? Because she is not a noble? Because she is poor? She is a servant," another council member spat. "And you, a human, are putting her above your duty. Think of the consequences." Elias looked across the table at Lyra. She was seated beside him, bandages still wrapped around her arm, eyes downcast. Her small hands gripped the edge of the table, trembling. "Lyra," he said softly, "look at me." She lifted her golden eyes hesitantly. In them he saw trust, fear, and something deeper, a quiet hope that he would choose her over everything else. Turning to the council, Elias took a deep breath. "She's not a servant," he said firmly. "She is my wife, and I will not abandon her for politics, for fear, or for your rules. She is worth more than any title or medal in this galaxy." The council erupted in protests, voices shouting over one another. "You will lose your rank." "Your command." He held up a hand. "Take it. Take everything. But you will never take her from me." Lyra's eyes widened. She tried to speak, her voice weak but urgent. "Elias, no. You will lose everything. Your honor, your career, your life. Don't. He shook his head gently. I have already lost the life I had, but I have found a life worth keeping, with you. For the first time she looked at him with awe, and the fear in her eyes softened. The council members banged their fists on the table. Threats were shouted, but Elias did not move. His choice was made. When the council finally adjourned, Elias and Lyra walked out of the building together. The city around them buzzed with whispers, stares, and disbelief. They ignored it all. Hand in hand, they stepped into the sunlight of the Zarin capital, the rain from the storm outside washing the past away. For the first time, they were free, not by law, not by politics, but by choice. They left the city that day. The Alliance stripped Elias of his rank, medals, and title, calling him a traitor, but he did not care. He had traded the weight of honor for the light of love. Lyra squeezed his hand tightly as they walked toward the transport shuttle. I never dreamed, she whispered, that someone would choose me, willingly. Elias smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the bright twin moons above. You are not a gift. You are not a symbol. You are you, and that is enough. During the long journey to a quiet planet far from politics, they began planning a life together. A life not defined by rules, not by expectations, but by trust, care, and love. Elias had nothing of value left except his own hands, his own courage, and the small warmth of Lyra's fingers in his. And that, he realized, was everything. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to fight for something truly important. Not a war, not a medal, not a mission, but a life built together, side by side, in a universe that had tried to keep them apart. Lyra rested her head on his shoulder as they gazed at the stars. Do you think we can be happy? She whispered. Elias kissed her hair gently. We already are, he said. The rest of the world can wait. We have each other. And in that moment, as the shuttle glided silently above the clouds, Elias and Lyra felt something more powerful than rank, titles, or even peace treaties. They felt freedom. Freedom to love, to heal, and to be more than what the galaxy expected of them. The choice was made, and it was the best choice either of them had ever made. Elias and Lyra left the bustling city and the judgmental eyes of politicians behind. They traveled to a quiet, peaceful planet near the border of human and Zarin space, a place where the air was clear, the skies wide, and the land untouched. Here no one cared who they were or what species they belonged to. Here they could simply be. Their new home was small and simple, a modest house with a garden and a porch that looked out over rolling green hills. There were no grand halls, no ceremonial decorations, and no reminders of past wars. Only the quiet hum of life, waiting for them to fill it with warmth. At first it was difficult. They had little money, and Elias had lost his rank and all the privileges of his former life. Lyra had only her small skills from serving in the palace, cooking, cleaning, tending small plants. But together, they learned to make it work. Elias repaired old shuttles for neighbors and sold his work to passing traders. Lyra planted a garden, selling herbs and flowers at the local market. They had little, but what they had was theirs. The first morning in their home, Lyra prepared breakfast in the small kitchen. Elias watched her, fascinated by how she moved with care and precision even when cooking simple meals. She hummed softly to herself, her ears twitching occasionally as if listening to music only she could hear. He felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet joy he had never known. Elias, she said softly, handing him a cup of tea. It smells nice. Do you think we will manage? He smiled, taking the cup and holding her small hand for a moment. We will manage, he said, because we are together, and together they did. Slowly, day by day, they built a life. They cleaned, cooked, repaired, and planted. Their laughter filled the house in ways that silence never had. They argued sometimes over small things like which plants to grow or how to fix a leaky roof, but even those moments were filled with love. Elias discovered the simple pleasures of a life without war. He watched Lyra dance in the rain, her silver fur shining in the sun, her tail swaying in joy. He learned to listen, not just hear. He discovered that love was not a battlefield. It was patience, care, and quiet moments of shared happiness. Lyra, in turn, learned that humans could be gentle and kind. She learned that a husband could be a friend, a protector, and a partner all at once. She learned that she was more than a servant, more than a symbol of peace. She was someone who could laugh, dream, and love freely. The townspeople began to notice them. Children from nearby houses would visit, curious about the human and his alien wife. At first, Lyra was shy, unsure how to interact with them, but she found joy in teaching them small things: how to plant seeds, how to care for animals, how to be kind to each other. Elias taught them courage, telling stories of bravery not to glorify war, but to show that fear could be overcome with heart and hope. Evenings were their favorite time. They would sit on the porch sipping tea and watch the twin moons rise over the hills. Sometimes they didn't speak. Sometimes they whispered dreams to each other. Lyra would rest her head on Elias's shoulder, her tail curling around his arm. Elias would hold her hand, feeling the softness of her fur and the steady beat of her heart. One evening, as fireflies glimmered in the garden, Lyra whispered, "When I was a servant, I dreamed of freedom, but I never dreamed it could feel like this." Elias kissed her forehead softly. "Freedom isn't just being safe," he said. "It's having someone who believes in you, someone who chooses you every day." She smiled, resting against him. "Then I am free," she said. And in that quiet home, surrounded by green hills, simple meals, and the gentle hum of life, they felt something stronger than wealth, stronger than titles, stronger than any war they had fought. They felt home, a home built from nothing but made powerful by love, trust, and devotion. Elias sometimes thought about his medals, his rank, and his old life. But none of it mattered. Here he had something no award or honor could give him: Lyra, alive, smiling, and choosing him as much as he chose her. And for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Years passed, and the quiet life Elias and Lyra had built flourished. The once judgmental whispers of neighbors were replaced with respect. People began to understand that love between them was not a weakness, not a mistake, but a powerful bond that healed both hearts and worlds. Their home grew lively. Children from the village often visited, fascinated by the human captain and the alien wife. Lyra taught them to tend the garden, to care for plants and animals, to listen to the wind and the stars. Elias shared stories of courage and resilience, not of war but of hope, showing that bravery could mean protecting what you loved rather than destroying what you feared. Every evening, Elias and Lyra would sit on their porch, hands entwined, watching the twin moons rise over the hills. The universe felt wide and full of possibilities, but they needed nothing beyond the warmth of each other's presence. Lyra had grown into her strength. Her fear and hesitation were replaced by confidence and joy. She laughed freely now, her golden eyes bright, her tail swaying with light-hearted energy. And Elias had changed too. He was no longer just a soldier, no longer bound by medals, rank, or duty. He was simply a man, fully alive, learning to love and be loved in return. One night, Lyra leaned her head on Elias's shoulder, her fur shimmering under the soft moonlight. "Do you remember?" she whispered. "The first time we walked through the market? I was so scared of the world, and you held my hand." Elias smiled, brushing a strand of fur from her face. "I remember. And I remember how you smiled for the first time. That smile changed everything." Her eyes glimmered with tears. "You chose me when the world wanted to take me away. You didn't care about your rank, your honor, or anyone's opinion. You chose me." He held her close, his voice quiet but strong. "Because you were never just a choice, you were everything I ever needed." As the years went on, their home became a symbol of hope. Humans and Zarans from far and wide came to see the couple who had defied hatred and fear, who had chosen love over duty, and who had built peace in the simplest, strongest way possible, through caring for each other. When Elias grew old, his hair turning silver like Lyra's fur, he would sit in the garden, holding her hand and listening to the quiet sounds of life. And Lyra too had aged gracefully, her golden eyes still full of warmth and wisdom. They never had wealth, titles, or grand halls, but they had built something far greater, a home filled with love, trust, and unshakable partnership. One evening, as the twin moons rose high, Elias whispered softly, his voice frail but full of life, "Lyra, you were never a servant. You were my reason, my freedom, my home." Lyra pressed her forehead to his, tears slipping silently down her face. "And you were my courage. You gave me a life I never dreamed of. You gave me love when I didn't think it was possible." Elias smiled faintly. then we have lived well. And when he passed peacefully that night, the universe felt the loss of a hero. But to Lyra, and to those who knew their story, he had left a legacy far beyond medals or commands. He had left love, proof that even in a universe filled with fear, war, and doubt, humanity's greatest power was the heart's courage. Lyra continued their life after him, tending the garden, teaching children, and sharing stories of bravery, not of battles, but of choices made with honor and kindness. And every night she would look at the stars and whisper, "Elias, we were free, we were loved, and we were home." Their story became more than just a tale of a human and an alien. It became a legend, a reminder that the smallest choices, acts of kindness, and brave hearts could change worlds. In the end, Elias hadn't been forced to marry a poor alien servant. He had been destined to love her. And in doing so, they had shown the universe that even the humblest beginnings could lead to the most extraordinary lives. Because love, courage, and trust, those were the true powers of humanity. And together, they had proven it.